I'm Dawn, 50 years old. I live peacefully with my husband. Until a few years ago, our lives were stormy. My mother-in-law Karen, who lived alone, became bedridden about 10 years ago. She tripped and fell at the entrance of her home and fractured her pelvis. She underwent 2 surgeries and spent quite a long time in the hospital. She was reluctant to undergo rehabilitation even though the muscles in her lower body had deteriorated. The nurses and physiotherapists who were exasperated with her began to contact me every day. Even though my husband Jeremy and I tried to persuade her, she didn't get out of bed. You will understand if you are in my situation. Do you know how hard it is not to be able to move your body the way you want to? Karen was pessimistic about her inability and often took it out on those around her. It was not unusual to hear her yelling from her hospital room. I knew that nothing I could say would help. I asked Jeremy to speak to her patiently, but he quickly gave up on her stubbornness. If she doesn't want to do it, then don't do it. Karen and he were equally stubborn, so it was hard to get them to come to terms. Even though the doctor told her that she would become almost bedridden if she didn't move, she showed no sign of concern, as if she had given up. She even said that if that happened, she wanted to move in with us. Jeremy and she were actually not blood related. She was the second wife of his late father, and after he passed away, she lived with Jeremy. She was after her late husband's fortune when she married. However, things didn't go as well with him as she hoped for. I heard that she still held a grudge over the failed succession of inheritance. I married into such a family and lived separately from her. I wanted to avoid living with such a nervous and selfish mother-in-law, even if she needed nursing care. I patiently tried to convince her to go to rehabilitation, but nothing changed. When I made a final proposal to transfer her to a hospital with a rehabilitation ward, she finally agreed. It was an hour-and-a-half drive from our house. I thought that she would complain when I told her that I couldn't come to visit her as often as before, but surprisingly, she accepted easily. Her muscular strength had deteriorated considerably during the time she had complained. I felt weary when I was told by the physiotherapist that she needed to work patiently. After 3 months in the hospital, she was discharged. Even though she got out, she was not able to move as freely as used to. I talked with Jeremy about admitting her into an assisted living facility since it had been impossible for her to live alone. She adamantly refused and demanded to live with us. I don't want to go to a facility. Are you trying to abandon me? She told all her friends and relatives that we were trying to get rid of her. We were made to look like the bad guys. I feel sorry for her. You're the eldest son, so you should take good care of her. Jeremy received numerous calls from his uncles and aunts. In the end, he was forced to agree with Karen. It was such a calculated ploy by the mother, who knew so well that her son cared about his reputation. He tried to prepare the house as best as he could to keep her quiet from complaining all the time. He installed a ramp at the entrance, bought a high-performance nursing bed, and so on. He was confident that she wasn't going to say anything. Contrary to his thought, she had something outrageous in her mind. You're my daughter-in-law, so you're responsible for taking care of me. She demanded that I look after her 24/7. I had a job and was not in a position to obey her. If I wanted her to live without any inconvenience, I needed a professional helper. Besides, Jeremy's income was not enough to support all of us. I couldn't quit my job to maintain our lifestyle. Jeremy disclosed the situation to her, but she was adamant. I don't want to be cared for by a stranger. Why can't I ask her to fulfill her duty as a daughter-in-law? If we didn't listen to her, she threatened us by saying she was going to tell all the relatives that we were heartless people. As soon as he heard the word relatives, he shut up. Thus, I had to work, raise a child, and take care of her. To do so, I resigned from the company where I had worked for a long time, and instead, I took a part-time job at a nearby diner. My income dropped dramatically, and the time I spent with Karen increased. Hey, how long are you going to make me wait? Bring me my food now. When I was at home, she was very noisy. If I was even a little late in preparing the meal, she yelled at me so loudly that it echoed throughout the house. She was also very particular about how I served the food. Tea had to be scorching hot. There had to be a variety of food, including Italian, Mexican, and Asian dishes. A side of vegetables at every meal was a must. Meat and fish had to be domestic products. It was very annoying for me as she was only crippled and had a normal appetite. Perhaps because she had nothing else to look forward to, there was no compromise at all when it came to food. If the food was even slightly cold, she asked me to reheat it. If she didn't like the menu, she ordered me to cook something else. It was a lot of work just to prepare a meal on top of helping her with personal care. She could not bathe by herself, so I had to help her. She refused to wear a diaper, and every time she needed to go to the bathroom, no matter how busy I was summoned to take her to the bathroom. The room had to be aired several times a day and had to be cleaned every day. Bed sheets and pillowcases were also changed daily. It was an absolute no-no to throw her good clothes and bedding into a dryer. She dared to claim that she couldn't sleep on a sheet that was not exposed to the sun every day. When it rained non-stop and the laundry didn't dry, she whined endlessly. How was I supposed to control the weather? I almost went off at her so many times. The biggest hassle was taking her to rehab once a week. The storm of complaints ravaged from the day before. She got even crankier and refused to go when I didn't pay her enough attention. Plenty of complaints kept coming out of her mouth before, during, and after rehab. I was on the verge of a mental breakdown listening to her negativity all the time. I felt as if I was trapped in a cage. Jeremy and I repeatedly asked her if we could hire a helper. The answer was always negative. Don't you feel ashamed to ask a stranger to take care of your family member? She made it sound as if we were the wrongdoer. I continued to work like a servant in obedience to her. 5 years had passed since she moved in with us, and she suddenly changed her attitude. I've decided to hire a helper for myself. Just make sure you pay for it. Jeremy and I wondered what had gotten into her head for changing 180 degrees. Regardless, I was overjoyed to be freed from the burden at last. I suddenly felt motivated to make arrangements for her. She did all the work, and everything was decided in no time. She arranged to have the expenses deducted monthly from her account, and I transferred the necessary amount there every month. It cost money, but she had long-term care insurance that covered half. If I worked full-time like before, I could manage to pay the bills. The helper came on weekdays, so we had never met her. My burden was considerably reduced both physically and mentally, and I felt more relaxed. Working outside also relieved my stress. The helper also took her to rehab, which was the hardest part of my life. She was like a lifesaver to me. I only had to transfer money to Karen's account every month, and that was it. 10 years had passed since she became bedridden, and a question arose in my mind. After a few years of hiring a helper, I had never once seen her. I didn't even know which agency she came from. I had my doubts about whether the money was really being passed on to the helper. When I spoke to Jeremy about it, he vehemently agreed. I had been transferring expenses every month, but I had never checked to see if they had been debited. He asked Karen to show her bank activities, but she stubbornly refused, saying that it was a private matter. You are trying to steal money from me. She turned away from him, and he could not find out. We couldn't even contact the helper as we never got the details. When our suspicions grew stronger, Jeremy suggested something. Let's set these up to see if the helper is really here. He bought small cameras on his way home from work. After making sure Karen was asleep that night, we set them up in various places around the house. When we checked the recordings, our jaws dropped to the floor. A short time after we left for work, she got up from the bed like nothing was wrong with her. After stretching and moving her neck and shoulders to relieve stiffness, she walked out of her room without a care in the world. When she returned a little later, she had an ice cream in her hand. We were speechless at the sight of her sitting on the bed and eating it. She walked around the house and took a shower by herself. After that, she changed her clothes and put on makeup, and then there was a sound of the front door opening. She must have gone out. When she returned 30 minutes later, she was carrying a bag in both hands. Inside were a large number of snacks. We were amused to see her hide them in the back of the closet so that we didn't find them. It seems that when we were not around during the day, she acted like a normal person, and when we came home, she instantly went into acting like a cripple. What the hell is going on? What is this? We murmured at the same time. Karen had completely healed. She had not been taking her rehabilitation seriously. I wondered how she managed to get better. Seeing her as a normal, healthy person, the anger I had been holding back until now welled up inside me. I couldn't remain silent for sure. I had to question her. Jeremy felt the same way. One evening, we came home on time and carried out the plan together. Karen watched the news every day on TV we bought for her. The news began to play loudly from her room as usual. We took advantage of that moment and operated the TV with a multifunctional remote control. She was surprised at the sudden change of the screen. The real show was about to begin. She was speechless at the image of herself walking leisurely through the house. The plan was to get her to talk by showing her all images captured by the cameras. She tried to turn off the TV with her remote control, but I quickly turned it back on with mine. We kept switching on and off for a while until she finally became impatient and glared at me. You, give me that right now. Why don't you just come and get it yourself? You can walk, right? I turned on the TV again and showed her the image. They were high-performance cameras that also recorded the sound of her cheerful humming perfectly. All of her daily activities were recorded on those. She stubbornly continued to turn it off, but when Jeremy snatched the remote from her hand, she was finally unable to resist. If you don't want to watch it so badly, why don't you just walk over to the TV yourself and turn it off at the base? His glare was harsh. She turned pale and tried to read our faces, and then she slowly stood up. She walked with a limp, but it was too deliberate after all that. As I stared at her coldly, she turned off the main power of the TV. The room became quiet. She seemed to be racking her brain trying to come up with some excuse. When she couldn't think of anything, she slowly sat down on the bed and began frantically apologizing. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. It was the first time I had ever heard her apologize. After that, she mumbled some kind of excuse. When Jeremy demanded that she explain clearly at once, she nervously began to tell us how she got better. When she started rehabilitation, her legs were already strong enough to walk. She recovered incredibly well after a few sessions and was able to walk normally within a week. Once she recovered, she needed to go back to living alone. If she pretended to be crippled, she was able to live with us. She thought it would have been an easier life for her and decided to keep acting the part. She refused rehabilitation so that she could imprint herself as a quirky person and reduced the number of trips to the hospital after she was discharged. I let out a deep sigh at how shallow and selfish she was. She told us that she just wanted to live an easy life. In the beginning, she enjoyed feeling superior by using me as a servant. When she began to feel annoyed with my earnest attempts to care for her, she lied about hiring a helper. She took money from us for her entertainment. Most of it was spent on social games such as lab simulations and music games. The amount I was transferring to her was not enough, and she was even taking it out from her pension. She told the doctor that she was able to walk again thanks to the training, and stopped rehabilitation a few days after she told us she wanted to hire a helper. We took care of all her living expenses, so she had no worries about spending her own money. She spent 10 years of her life using me as her servant without a care in the world. We could never forgive her. Get out of here as soon as possible. I nodded in agreement. You can walk and even take a shower by yourself. You can even go shopping alone. You don't need nursing care at all. You don't need to live with us. Karen looked up and instantly burst into tears. Please let me stay here. Her house had already been torn down and the land sold. She couldn't live alone anymore. She went on and on with selfish excuses. Her shallow scheme of living a financially and physically easy life was so obvious, and yet she kept pleading to rely on us. Our determination was unshakable. Move out in a week. Jeremy left the room with that. I was about to follow him when she hastily grabbed my arm. Please, you're on my side, aren't you? It's true that we haven't gotten along well, but isn't it a normal thing between in-laws? We can get along with each other from now on. I'll help you with anything at home. She didn't realize that the reason we didn't get along and I had a hard time were all because of her. I shook off her hand and said quietly, "Like you said before, you don't want to be taken care of by a stranger. I am your daughter-in-law, but you're like a stranger to me. Can you please stop referring me like I'm family only when it suits you?" She slowly crumbled down to the floor. I walked away without looking back. After that, she didn't make any effort to move out. Jeremy got impatient and started packing for her. The sight of him stuffing her personal belongings into boxes was frightful, and she was unable to protest. She had rented a small apartment in a hurry, but she was going to have a hard time living on her pension alone. Even the money from selling the land was spent on stupid games, and she didn't have much left. She could no longer rely on us and asked for help from her friends and relatives. We had shown the recordings to all kinds of people, so no one was likely to give her helping hands. Everyone was furious to find out that she pretended to be physically disabled for 10 years. They refused to get involved with her in any way. Jeremy demanded she pays back the 10 years of living expenses and the money that was supposed to be paid for a helper. She cried and tried to default, saying she didn't have that kind of money, but when we threatened to take her to court, she shut up. She's now cleaning offices in the morning and working at a factory during the day to make ends meet. She pretended to be disabled for a long time and stole our time and money as much as she wanted. I'm sure she's suffering from the painful repercussions. What a pathetic end for a woman who married for money and tried to live comfortably by deceiving her son and his wife. We have been able to get back to our peaceful lives for the first time in 10 years. Even if Karen truly needs care in the future, we would not reach out to her. Well, if she's that tough, I'm sure she will live a long and healthy life.